defense, I was trying to get some historical background to the payment of taxes. Actually the payment of taxes existed before Christ, hundreds and thousands of years. Some historians say people were paying taxes practically 2,000 to 3,000 years before Christ. Now, the systematization of paying taxes came through the Greek culture and Egyptian culture, and very precisely through the Roman culture. The Romans introduced systematic payment of census taxes. Now, when we go to the first pages of the Gospel of Matthew, we will find that Emperor Caesar Augustus Tiberius, who proclaimed a decree that each and every individual in his empire must be registered. And that is why Joseph and Mary went from Nazareth to Bethlehem to get themselves registered. And it was before the birth of Christ. And when they were in Bethlehem, Mary gave birth to Christ. And it is said that after this introduction of the taxes, there were pretty many revolutions among the Jewish people protesting this kind of taxes that were paid to the emperor in Rome. Now, the Jewish people never believed being under any other foreign king. Their only king was God and their own ruler or their own local leader or king. But then they never believed in other foreign dictatorship or king. Consequently, here, in order to entrap Jesus, to catch him, because the Pharisees did not like him right from the beginning, they come along with the Herodians to put him a question. And this question was to catch him. We know that earlier there were other occasions that they brought arguments to catch Jesus. There was an occasion where they caught a woman in the very act of adultery and they dragged before Jesus. They wanted to stone that woman, and they said, according to the law of Moses, we have to stone this woman. What do you say? And what Jesus said? He pretended to write something on the ground, and he got up and said, well, anyone who does not have sin may be the first person to cast a stone at her. And what happened? All of them left. None was present to cast a stone at that woman. There was another incident. They wanted to put Jesus to the test. They were the Sadducees and Pharisees came together. They made a parable for themselves in order to trap Jesus. And what was the parable? A woman marrying 7 brothers and leaving no sons and daughters. No sons and daughters. 7 brothers. And they asked Jesus, whose wife she will be? Whose wife she will be in the resurrection? And I had made a long back a comment here. Most probably all those 7 men were impotent. Just imagine 7 people marrying that woman, leaving no children. And Jesus said, well, in the heavens, there is no marrying, no giving in marriage. We all will be like angels. Now, this is the third argument today. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor? Now, if Jesus said it is not lawful to pay taxes to the emperor, then Jesus would be directly against the emperor. And that would be the reason where he will be imprisoned or he will be eliminated. But if he says, yes, you should not pay or you should pay, then there will be another argument. Jewish people should not pay taxes to the emperor. So he will be either against the emperor or against the Jewish people. Now, consequently, what Jesus, knowing their malice, he asks for a coin, and a denarius was handed over to him. And looking at the denarius, he asks, whose head is this, whose title? They answer, Caesar's. But then what did Jesus do with that coin? Did he put it in his pocket? We have no reference to it. Whether he gave that coin back to them, no reference to it. We do not want to investigate on that. But then Jesus answered, looking at this coin, he said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give to God what belongs to God. Let us now analyze and reflect on this saying of Jesus. It's a very famous saying. Many people repeat it over and over again. When we have to pay taxes to the state, when we have to pay to God what belongs to God. I would like to give a different interpretation today. The first thing, pay to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. We are all doing that. We are paying our taxes, right? If you do not pay your taxes, CRA will come after you. Okay, whenever you land as a permanent resident or a visitor, you are first asked to make that SIN card, right? SIN card. You get a number. And I was just surprised when I first came to Canada. I asked, what is this SIN card? You know, we always tie it with sins. No, it is SIN card, Social Security number. Anyway, yeah, behind that number, we are tracked whether we pay taxes or not. You know, there are two things that you cannot avoid in this life. What are those two things? Death and taxes, okay? All other things you can avoid, run away. Taxes and death you cannot avoid. Well, what do we actually gain by paying taxes to the state? As good Christians, dear friends, Jesus tells us that civilly you are responsible to do your duty in the society. You cannot escape from that. And by paying our taxes, we have good roads, good systems, we have schools, we have hospitals, seniors' homes, we have facilities that are available here and there. That is what the government does. And that is what we have practically copied from the Romans, because Romans were expecting taxes from the people, obligatory, and through those taxes they built good roads, they gave good facilities, they had a powerful military that brought discipline, that conquered territories all over. So that was what the Romans were doing. Now let us come to the second part of it. Pay to God what belongs to God. Normally what do we understand? Now Father is going to open the chapter of paying what you have to pay in the church, Sunday collection and your tithes to the church and projected ones. I am not speaking about that, okay? I am speaking about in a quite different dimension altogether. Dear friends, the first and foremost duty of each and every Christian, because we know that we all of us are made in the image of God. Now, paying to God what belongs to God, God does not become sad or happy by your contributions, because God is fullness. You just imagine this whole universe God has created. This planet is nothing but an invisible dot in the whole universe. If God has created, if God is so rich, if God is so powerful, what God expects from us? By our contribution, by doing something. Sometimes we think that, very often Christians think that, oh, we have to do this thing and that thing, we have to go for mass, we have to pray, we have to do this sacrifice, we have to fast, we have to make some mortification in order to please God. God does not become bigger by your contributions and by your prayers. When you do not pray, when you do not praise God, God does not shrink or He does not become sad God. God is fullness. Now, in order to understand what we have to pay to God belongs to God is when we know from the book of Genesis, we are all made in the image of God. Each and every one carries the image of God within ourselves. And therefore, we need to do that responsibility of paying to God what belongs to God is towards our neighbors. The first thing is our obligation, responsibility of loving our family members. That is the first duty. Dear friends, we have to see God's presence and God's image in our family members. Charity begins at home. You know, sometimes people think of contributing through a fat check to a charitable organization. I write a big check to the charitable organization when that person's family members are really suffering. Of course, they were very rude, they were ungrateful, or they have done some harmful thing to you. But when we think about Christian charity, dear friends, it begins at home. If we neglect our own family members, if your brother or sister, your uncle or aunt, your grandparents or your parents or your children are suffering, your duty is towards your family members. See God's image in your family members. That is your first obligation. The second one, once you know that you have in some way helped your family members, then your responsibility expands or extends to your neighbors, your neighborhood. There may be a person who is homeless or poor, who is homebound, who is lonely, who requires your time, who requires a word of encouragement, support. That is the second step we have to take, seeing God's image in our neighbors. It happens in our religious congregations, or it can happen everywhere. What happens, I have seen in my own order, sometimes our superiors are so generous, sending help to Africa and to other part of the world, when they do not help and contribute their share to make the community members comfortable. So what is the use of sending money to Africa when your own community members are not satisfied and happy, if you do not look after them? So that is the very important thing to note. We have to see God in our neighbors, in our neighborhood, in our own circle. And the third responsibility is open our eyes to the world missions. Today we are celebrating the Mission Sunday. It is not so much contributing money, but we can make sacrifices. Even a small sacrifice that we make, I give up a beer or wine or a movie or entertainment or a travel or whatever, and I sacrifice and send that money to a place where there is need. There are so many missionaries working all over the world. What do I do on my part to support the mission? Just imagine, the Catholic Church is the biggest organization in the world that caters to the poor and the homeless and the lepers and the AIDS patients, those who are running those institutes for children who are suffering of cancer and physically challenged, mentally challenged, people who suffer addictions. So there are so many organizations, hundreds and thousands of them all over the world. So if I make a little sacrifice, and send that help to those destinations. I have been always telling that, you just imagine how many millions are suffering at the border of Iraq and Syria. Millions of them. There are so many people suffering due to wildfires, forest fires. So many millions have lost their homes because of the floods. So how can I contribute my share? It is not sending hundreds and thousands of dollars. What is important, dear friends, is the widow's mite. You remember that particular incident when Jesus was in the temple, when he saw that widow putting 2 copper coins in the treasury of the temple, and Jesus appreciated and said, she has put the most. Even though Jesus saw many rich people pouring money into the treasury of the temple, Jesus appreciated that little contribution. So if we can do that, then we see God in those people who suffer all over the world. The last point is this. Dear friends, we need to do justice to our neighbors. We have to hate sin, but we should never hate the sinner. No matter who that person is, irrespective of caste, creed, religion, color, language, we need to love our neighbors. Doing justice is that. Seeing the image of God in the other is giving to God what belongs to God. In our own society, there are people of different qualities, or people who are different from us. How do we look at them? Do we judge them? Do we criticize them? They have the right to be respected and accepted. They have that fundamental human right. Of course, if you do not like the sin, that is okay. But do not dislike the sinner. And that is where we see the image of God in the other. Dear friends, when we look at this statement of Jesus, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, we as good Christians, we must be responsible citizens wherever we are. And then we have to be responsible citizens of heaven too. That means we need to respect and love and share and help those people who suffer around us. And I say, especially charity begins at home. Then it extends to our neighborhood, then in our country and abroad. If we can do that, dear friends, we will be certainly bearing witness to Christ, who was a just man, who was a lovable person, and we share in his mission here in this world. Please rise, we profess our faith.